What's up, Jets fans? Welcome to the latest edition of Jets Latest, where you get the latest on the Jets, Jets. I'm your host, the spitting statistician, Dane Martinez. Thank you to everybody that are watching these videos, liking these videos, subscribing to the Jets Latest channel as we continue to grow. And remember, subscribe, tell a friend to tell a friend, even if the Jets look like one of the worst teams in the NFL. And that they do. They are the only winless team in the NFL at 0-7, and they are, in fact, making the move away from Justin Fields and to what was their backup quarterback, Tyrod Taylor. People thought this was going to be happening. People thought this was going to be happening a couple of weeks ago, right? Remember the press conference with Aaron Glenn, how he kind of decried that as something that should happen. But now they are making the move. And listen, I think it is about time for a number of reasons. Let's get into those reasons. The first of which is Justin Fields was not productive, okay? If you look at the first 3 quarters of these games, you take out garbage time, for example. Here are the net passing yards in his games, right? And it started okay against Pittsburgh. The offense looked good, 173 net passing yards. Look at the other 5. 17 net passing yards in the first 3 quarters against Buffalo, 91 against Miami, 97 against Dallas, and then it got real bad. Only 7 net passing yards against the Denver Broncos. Remember, he finished that game with minus 10 net passing yards, and then 25 against Carolina. The Jets have thrown for 143, 144 yards per game. That is the worst in the NFL. The Jets have the worst passing attack in the NFL. But if you want to know what the real death nail was, and this is all you had to know the Jets are making an organizational change here, is what Woody Johnson had to say when there was a microphone in front of him. He goes, "It's hard when you have a quarterback with the rating that we've got. If you look at any head coach with a quarterback like that, you're going to see similar results. If we could just complete a pass, it would look good." That is what owner Woody Johnson had to say, and that's all you need to know about the Justin Fields era in New York being done. And here's the thing. A couple of things you'd note from that. One, he's kind of also in the same time giving a vote of confidence to Aaron Glenn. I've told you I still believe in Aaron Glenn. It sounds like Woody Johnson does as well. In that comment, he said things like special teams are playing well. The defense seems to be turning around. Things that are in fact true. The defense and the special teams have kept us in games. And here's the other piece of it that I really think is important in a move away from Justin Fields, right? I think what's also important is they're clearly not a playoff team. We're clearly in rebuilding mode. But at least having competent quarterback play would allow Aaron Glenn, Darren Muji, the coaching staff, to get a real read on the rest of the team. With the offense looking the way it does right now, you can't get a real read on an Arian Smith, on a Mason Taylor, on if Josh Reynolds can be a serviceable, number 2, 3 wide receiver, and the rest, the defense, the position the defenses are in, So for Aaron Glenn to, in the rest of the season, for Muji to get a read on the rest of the team, which I think is really important, and where there are some positives, I think they do need to make this switch to kind of away from Justin Fields. And so that is what is happening as we move forward. But I do think it was important that Woody Johnson, in that same breath, kind of gave confidence and faith in Aaron Glenn. I talked about kind of these first half numbers, these first 3 quarters numbers, right? Because if you look at some of the scores, I have been saying, hey, 1 score game, but a lot of that is just garbage time, okay? The scores at the end of the game have been largely against prevent defenses, have been largely when the games are out of, kind of contention already. And like I said, the Jets offense has only scored 1 touchdown in the first 3 quarters of the game over the last month and a half. 6.1 points per game in the first half. That is the last place number in the entire NFL. If you go all the way back to Buffalo, they had a Rucker touchdown in the 4th quarter in garbage time when the game was already in doubt. Tampa Bay, they came all the way back. Garrett Wilson, Alan Lazard. Remember, this was with Tyrod Taylor, and then the Will McDonald field goal block. It happened in Miami. Fields had the scramble when they were down by a bunch of scores, and then a Garrett Wilson touchdown on an incredible catch, if you remember, right? Also in Dallas, Andrew Beck, Garrett Wilson, touchdowns in garbage time. And then in Denver and Carolina, no touchdowns all game. Here's what Aaron Glenn had to also say, because he was talking about how he had to kind of have conversations with himself, talk to the staff, go through this and talk to other coaches who had made these decisions, right? Because it was really a tough situation. He says there's a lot that goes into doing this for me personally. Then there's getting with the staff, asking other coaches that have been in this situation how they handle it. I want to make sure I make the right decision. I think ultimately part of this decision was made not only around Justin Fields, but again, for the rest of the team. He can't afford to lose the locker room. Everybody knows that they got no chance right now with Justin Fields, mostly because of the way he holds the ball, doesn't process the reads, move forward in that way, right? If you have Tyrod in there, and by the way, everybody, I know I've been saying Tyrod, right? And yes, that's because there was a long time ago, Tyrod kind of said that that's what his mama called him. I know recently he came out and said Tyrod is fine. Baker Mayfield even once said it's Tyrod. I think Tyrod is just so kind of a man that he's not pressing people on it. So don't give me shade for the conversation of whether it's Tyrod or Tyrod or whatever it is. I'm going to call them both moving forward. But I digress, right? I think that going to Taylor really helps us see what the rest of the team can do, and that has to be the priority now in this rebuild. The last thing I want to talk to you about in this one, as we move forward to seeing the Cincinnati Bengals with Joe Flacco under center, is obviously one of their biggest weapons. One of the biggest weapons in the entire NFL is Bengals wide receiver Ja'Marr Chase. I was really excited to see a potential matchup of Ja'Marr Chase being covered in the South by Sauce Gardner. But Sauce Gardner is in the concussion protocol, and that means that they're going to probably be without Sauce and without Garrett Wilson, right? Both of these young foundational pieces that signed extensions in the offseason that are kind of these anchors for the future are going to miss this game, it looks like, against the Cincinnati Bengals. I was hopeful to see this, kind of matchup against Ja'Marr Chase. Chase won the wide receiver triple crown last year, led the NFL in catches, yards, and touchdowns, and leads the NFL again with 58 catches so far on 80 targets. Garrett Wilson, however, working his way back from that hyperextended knee. Remember, they didn't put him on IR. And Aaron Glenn actually talked about if he could play this week. He goes, I hope that he plays, but I understand how these injuries are. I'm not a doctor. I listen to the docs and they give me the best advice that he needs and for me so we can move forward. I don't think he's going to play, and I'm not trying to make more excuses for Aaron Glenn. Obviously, the Justin Fields debacle has happened, but think about it. We literally are without our two best players on offense, Garrett Wilson and Elijah Vera Tucker, in my opinion, right? Who got injured and is going to miss the whole year. We're without two of our three best players on defense in this game, potentially, if we don't have Sauce and Quincy Williams. Obviously, Quinnen Williams has been a stud. And I'm going to talk more about this defense a little bit tomorrow on Jets Latest because, listen, the defense has been making some strides. We'll talk about that on tomorrow's episode of Jets Latest. But there are not many teams that can lose their top two players on offense, that can lose two of their best three players on defense, that can have the worst turnover margin in the NFL, as I continue to talk about and remain competitive. And by the way, I see a lot of people out there talking about Sauce and saying that Sauce hasn't played well. Cut all that noise out, okay? Sauce was targeted one time last week, broke up the pass. Was targeted one time the week before that, broke up the pass. Sauce Gardner has not allowed a reception since week 5, for goodness sakes. And all season, he has allowed the fewest catches, only 10 catches, from anybody who's had as many coverage snaps as he has. He's given up 10 catches for 122 yards in 7 weeks. That is tied for first among quarterbacks in terms of PFF grades and that kind of statistic, okay? So the idea to hate on Sauce, I think, has gone a little bit too far. We'll see if he gets through the protocol. I would have loved to see him go up against Ja'Marr Chase. But let's see what some of you guys are saying out there on Jets Latest. Remember, subscribe to the channel, like these videos, watch these videos, tell a Jets fan friend, if they're still out there, to tell a Jets fan friend. Let's see what some of you guys are saying. Tim Smith, E2M, says, after the bye week, we need to still cook at quarterback and see what he may have. I mean, that's interesting. I don't know if he's actually ready, but, we got to see what we got to see, right? D God 1973 says, who we getting in the draft? Well, listen, if they do have a top pick, this is a very quarterback-rich draft coming up. Okay, everybody from Mendoza in Indiana to Simpson at Alabama to Lenore Sellers to Nussmeier to Klubnik to Arch Manning. There's a lot, and there's plenty of time for us to talk about that, and we will throughout the season. But we do still have a season to see and players that are currently on the roster to talk about. At CP9654 says, every week it gets darker. I hear you. I do hope that this is the rock bottom. We actually make this change, and we just start to see improvement from these guys on the roster. I got to say this. We're going to talk about it later in the week. There's a lot of other young players on these Jets that have given us reasons for hope. We'll talk about that. I mean, I think we hit on a lot of guys in the draft, whether it be Membu and Taylor, all the way to Malachi Moore, all the way to Kika Mayuga, who has looked good, and Muji has made some great trades before the start of the season that I think have been beneficial. We'll get into that. And then Ron P5022 says, another beautiful L. Love, we're getting closer to that number one pick. Get nervous when Taylor went in. Got to keep playing Fields. He gives us the best chance to lose. That may be the case, but I think for the culture involved, for the evaluation that Glenn and Muji need to do, I think it is the right time, the right move to go away from Justin Fields. So that'll do it for this episode of Jets Latest. Remember, if you want to hear more from me, the spitting statistician Dane Martinez, I'm the host of the FTN Fantasy Show over on SiriusXM, the fantasy channel number 87, and FTN Fantasy. Great website, tools, rankings, data, all sorts of stats to make you a better fantasy player. Hopefully you're better than 0-7 like the Jets, and a better sports gambler if that's what you are into. We will talk about more going into this week, going into this matchup against Cincinnati. And tomorrow, we're going to talk a little bit more about this defense, which honestly is making strides. And we're going to talk about why the hate for Steve Wilkes early in the season, I think, was a little too much and a little too early. But for now, for this episode of Jets Latest, we out of here. Peace.